It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight for our speaker. And where did I put the piece of paper? Who is that speaker? That speaker is Geoff Mcfetridge. And there's my piece of paper. That was bad design. Geoff doesn't do bad design. He only does sort of astonishing design. He does magazine covers, and he does skateboards. He does posters, and he does film titles. He does T-shirts, and he does motion graphics. He does textiles and advertising, and he does all this and more with a sort of signature visual wit and emotional depth. This has gained him a worldwide following and a deep respect from his peers. We're incredibly lucky to have him here. I'll give you a little bit of biographical information about him. He's born in Canada, schooled at the Alberta College of Art and Design, and then came south and, a little bit west, to go to Cal Arts, where he did the graduate program in design. While he was there, he was already winning public acclaim as a grad student, winning awards from the Art Directors Club and ID magazine. And then from 96 to 98, he was art directing the seminal underground magazine Grand Royale for the Beastie Boys. For Beastie Boys, In 2005, he co-founded the skateboard company Solitary Arts, and in 2006, he launched a wallpaper and fabric company called Pottok Prints. He works as a commercial designer pretty much for a client list that just blows your mind. Everybody from Hewlett-Packard to the X Games to the graphics for Where the Wild Things Are, directed by Spike Jonze. Recently, he's done wallpaper, carpets, blankets, and more, I think, for the Standard Hotel. In addition to all of that, he's an artist who's most recently shown paintings at Half Gallery in New York City. I'm just delighted to welcome Geoff Mcfetridge.
Thank you. Should have sat closer. It's always funny when I put together, I don't like a talk because I always would prefer just to not show anything. Which I don't know why. I guess because I don't want to actually look at my work. So instead I just choose things that I like to show, which is the second option. And like none of it is ever like Hewlett-Packard or Apple or any of these projects. So I don't know what that is, but it'll just be a bunch of stuff that I like to look at, but it's most of it, it's barely in the real world. It mostly just exists in my kind of isolated world. And a lot of it is actually work that comes out of my process and the way when you're, the good thing about working as a designer is, the work is making, and I think that's what always drew me, to graphic design, is that it's like you're always, it's almost like a no waste enterprise. I think when it's operating well, in that you're just always thinking. That's your job. There's not a lot of in between time. It's like if you can always be, firing the cylinders, and in that way, I'm always drawing, and so. It's like every drawing is a footstep to get somewhere, and then so I'm kind of, you're left over with the kind of the results of the process, which are a bunch of drawings, and then at the same time, my drawings are often about creativity, so it's this kind of like perpetual loop where I'm like making work that is all kind of. Most of it, to me, like at its root, is really about creativity, and it's about that process. Like this drawing, for example, I did for my friend Adam Silverman, who's a potter, and so it's him. It's the ultimate pot. which is his mind distilled. Calling myself a designer, I think is like, I am a designer. But I think it's the classic thing that people talk about. Like, if you say you're a designer, it's like the problem, like if someone asks you what you do and you say you're a designer, the problem is like, then they ask you, oh, well, what do you make? Like they don't, like, it's not just like I'm a plumber. Like they don't ask you like, what kind of plumbing do you do? And then I have no way to answer it. So I make up stuff, like kind of like my introduction, like, oh, he's a marketing guy and he does so I kind of make up the same stuff. So I say like, oh, I do marketing or t-shirts. And then if they say like what? And I really can't answer. I have no idea, because in reality, like I call myself a designer and I do design, but it's really I use the design process. So I use projects to like create that momentum, to like come up with things, to make those things like become sometimes real things or images of things. And those things, those are the things, that's what I do. It's those things, and those generate projects. Those become like the wallpaper for the Standard, or like I just did carpets for the Standard Hotel and wallpaper. And it's those, so it's not, but those things kind of came out of a process. Like that work was just design work that I was doing that kind of became something. And that it's design, so I'm showing, so these are two kind of graphic things. The first thing was just like a poster I made for myself, and this is like one of the few actual like projects that are like designer projects, like got hired to make a thing. And I think it's, and I chose them because they're like, if you think like, what's graphic? They're both like graphic things, but they are rooted, as much as they're graphics, they're rooted in drawing, and it's very much, they're connected. I think like you can kind of imagine them connected to the idea making process, which is drawing. So I'm kind of just like drawing with shapes or forming things with the eye for like lines and shape. So this was for a company that in Canada that like it's like you could volunteer to pay more for your energy in like in an eco-friendly way, and so it's like paying more for clean energy. And it's funny is that like recently there was a review written about a show that I'm in right now, and she mentioned like my signature cartoon style, and I was bummed about that, like, oh, like, cause, and at the same time, like, it's like, I like do stuff like that, but like, I don't want to be called a cartoonist, or like that, like, I don't want to be a cartoonist, but because at the root is like, I want to have like the best of both worlds. Like, I want to draw cartoons, but I want it to be read as language. I want to like use like the basest image with, for me, like the highest purpose, which is like self-expression or creating something that makes you like feel something like sincerely, but in a way like it's almost like unusual. Like can you feel like something, like can you have like a real experience, an experiential moment with a cartoon or a drawing? So it's and in that way, like so this is like a bunch of work that is just they're just drawings. So on one side everything I do starts with a drawing, and then it will become, sometimes it becomes something, sometimes it becomes a graphic or a poster or a video, but it starts off with a drawing. And I think like a few years ago, I decided like that. It was a really long time ago. I discovered that there was something to the sketch for the thing, and what was good. Like if I'm making a notation for myself, So if the way I work is I have these large sketchbooks, and I'll just start thinking of ideas, and I'll just make notations for myself, and each one of those notations is an idea. And at some point you go like, well, why finish it? And it really is like a notation is, it's like language that like I understand, and then what is the language that everybody understands, and how to use the kind of that, like the very kind of spare, like iconic communication of notation, and how can it be used successfully for everyone to read. And that was interesting to me, the speed of communication, and like this very like personal, like as it's like a like super broad, like if everyone in the world can understand a symbol, then how, but at the same time, can you make somebody cry? Can you make somebody feel something very closely, and start to interact with this thing that is very cold and universal, but it's like an experience. This is showing like the difference between like a sketch and like the finished thing. And this is not finished because I've been working on it for years, but I haven't come up with the final outcome. But the idea was to come up with like it reads from the top left across, and then down, and then across, and down, and across. And it's the idea of creating visual rhymes. So the idea of like with language, like when you're with a poem, if I'm sitting and writing a poem, and I want it to rhyme, which I like poems that rhyme. And when I get to the end of the word, like I have only so many words, and I have my thoughts, and I'm kind of stuck with like my language, which is English. So I like didn't invent the language. I've been given this language, and then it's like reduced even more because like there's only so many words in our language that rhyme. But then I'm conveying something, like in my poem, I'm conveying some like personal thing. Whereas with graphic design, you actually are inventing the language. You're not, as much as there's language that exists, like you could just come up with some shape, or you can draw something in your unique way. And so this is playing with like rhymes. So like an apple rhymes with a circle, but a circle rhymes with a square, because they're both like these basic geometry. And then a square rhymes with a three-dimensional square, which rhymes with the table, which rhymes with like a pie, like Stonehenge thing. And then a horse, and then a Nordic horse, like a Scandinavian horse. And like, it goes on and on. But to me, what was interesting, that if somebody saw this, and that's why I'm still working on it, because I don't know if would anybody get that? If they saw it, maybe graphic designers would get it. But that's what would be interesting. Like if I saw this, I'd be like, oh yeah, a triangle does rhyme with a mountain. And you would start to travel. And I think that's why it's important to read it linearly. Like it would be good as a long strip. That would be better. If it was like a long strip that you continued. Because what would happen is you would start to like go into my mind. And you would start to, it's like I'm making you think like me, but not in like a in a way that's like inviting, like we're sharing something, we're sharing an experience, and that's like an ideal in my work, where it's like you feel like this like closeness, and that, when a skull with no head rhymes with a hat, and you start to feel like, yeah, like that is, and you're thinking, in one way it's just, if my mom was reading, it's like, oh, thinking like a graphic designer, or if like someone close to me, it's like, oh, getting a joke that I would tell, knowing me personally. So that's like more of the similar thoughts, so like this idea of like reading graphics, and things are like coming together in your head, and you're having this kind of like personal like experience with the person reading, like looking at the graphic. So like A, B, or C. And this is another thing that's like unfinished, but it worked good as 2 slides, so I put it in. It doesn't really work as anything else, so. And that's, it's that the thing with language is like is actual language, like words is like really, it's really it's really useful and super clear, but then it can also be poetic. And for me, it's like I'm always kind of trying to find like visual language that works in the same way, that is both like really clear but like poetic and kind of feeling infinite. This has nothing really to do with that, but this is but this is me becoming language, which I had hallucinations very often as a kid, and one of them was that I was a T, which was actually like a really horrific nightmare. That like it was really scary for my mom because I was standing in the middle of the room like that, and I was like, I'm a T, and it was horrible. But you wouldn't know, like it wasn't funny at all as a kid to be the T. No. Yeah, so this is another thing where it's like you could say more with, so this is, I did a bunch of packaging for this band called The Whitest Boy Alive, and we did cards, and each card was representing an idea of like, if you were gonna become, this was Erland from the band came with this idea, like we could do a set of cards, and each card represents like a creative attribute that could give you, like that as an artist or a musician, it could give you success or not success, but it'll be part of your way of navigating the world. So so that first one was ambition, and this was breaking the rules, like you're a rules follower or breaker. And it was as a project, it was really, which is another good, it's another thing, like working as a graphic designer, it's like a way of, the just physically being a graphic designer and taking on projects, like opening yourself up to the world for projects and collaborations. For me, it's like, it really helps me understand what I'm doing. And so this was like very clear, like as a creative person, like you given like this impetus, like a word, it's like for me, like the way I work, that's really, I realize that's what I do for myself. Like I give myself words and then express them. So it's like the most pared down version of like kind of like a client relationship if you have a project, because this was really like kind of interesting. And so this was a project that it looks exactly like the Whitest Boy Alive stuff, and I did it in the same way, but I just gave myself the words. So this was based on like the idea of like your creative life. And this was for an education, like illustrations for an educational brochure in Norway or something. And it's based on the idea of like you create your choices. Your life is made up of the choices you make. And this was for the same thing that was, you won't, it's a Norwegian saying, you won't fail until you stop trying. And that's, kids peeking into their future. And then this was for Gap Red, with the idea of like small change small choices can lead to large change. So a square slowly becoming a circle, like drawing it in the sand, a square slowly becoming a circle. So like I use the same themes in my work, and in a way that, because it never feels done. I think that it's like I'm always in a process of reduction, and with reduction it becomes also you kind of just go deeper and deeper and deeper into the same ideas. This is a drawing, so like that previous drawing was like these, you saw these people, and this is a drawing my dad did when I was a kid. I asked him to send, he didn't have any drawings left over. My dad, he's a lawyer, but he always did drawings, like when he would doodle, he would draw people, like really ordinary people that were just like, so this is a line, we used to go to this store, this like discount store, and this is like what people looked like there. And like, but mainly what he drew were like other lawyers. So he'd be like a guy in a suit with a briefcase, and I always really liked that. Like he drew like the stuff around him, and that was like, and there were doodles. There was just like what was relaxing for him, and I think that's, and I didn't realize it till after, but that's like I started doing these like drawings of people, and I think that's where it kind of came out of. This kind of like ordinary, just like ordinary, but not, there's, each person is unique, and that these things are like time consuming, so you are just drawing people, so you can't, like you'll draw like, and you don't want to do everybody in a hat, so that or you got to change the hat, so it's this kind of like test of just kind of like pushing forward with like filling in a crowd, and then. So then I was doing those crowds, and I was like, well, how could I turn this into like some, like, I guess it's like using it as, like almost like I hired an illustrator to do something for me. So it became like a poster, and then it was became part of an installation. So this is kind of showing like a thread of we'll get kind of tuned onto like an image or a thought, and it'll continue through. So that went from like a t-shirt for the Gap to then my own just drawing, and then incorporating it into this installation. And then with that installation, I was like, well, how could I do it without words? So the us and them piece, and so it was like, oh, I could do it. So then this painting here. And then I got asked to do this like public, just like a mural on the Montalban Theater, and this billboard that they own next to it, that actually Nike paid for it, but it doesn't have any branding or anything on it. And it was just supposed to be like a kind of like a neighborhood, it's in Hollywood, at Hollywood and Vine, or it was, and so it was just kind of part of like the murals that are in that area, like kind of part of that history. And then it covered that whole building.
3, 2, 1. When you think of the Give Me 3 campaign, the mayor says to also think of the 3 Bs. That's to give bicyclists 3 feet beside, behind, and beyond. Reporting in downtown LA, Whitney Trollman, KCAL 9 News.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So I did that poster. So poetry, graphics, then poetry, graphics, poetry, graphics. Oh. This is, I got asked to do this like public art project that was talking about, and they gave a quote that was what we were talking about when we were talking about love. So this is a piece I did about like love. So L-O, so like disappearing. V, being thrown down. E, and then the people down at the bottom are holding hands. They found each other. Yeah, only 2. It's bad odds. It's love. And then it was on this cube. So this, I thought it might be interesting to show. Like this is a presentation I did for OWL. Well, it's not. This is what I sent to them. So like I worked. It was to create a mark for them, and it was an AOL. It is an AOL site that's kind of a central meeting place for. It's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like Yahoo or something. Like it's like a central, like a new kind of branding of AOL where they can kind of branch off from it with all kinds of different sites and ways to check your email and blogs and stuff like that. So this is like what I sent to them as like variations on on what owl could be. And I just found this PDF and thought it was kind of interesting to show that when it's something like this and dealing with, this was done for Partners in Spade, which is a consultancy, like Andy Spade's like consulting company. So they're like visually like really open, which is kind of the ideal type of people to work with, and like this type of thing that I would show, which is kind of similar to like the shapes rhyming thing, is that ideally like presenting stuff to a client or to someone you're collaborating with, like the best thing to do is just to, it's like not as much about showing the work as like showing the way you're thinking, and like to kind of take them through it with you, and then then you're at a point where you can like, where you actually can physically collaborate, and then they're kind of, and that, you know, you can kind of get to a point where there's like a deeper understanding of what you're doing. So I like to show like chronologically, like what I'm coming up with and where it's kind of going, and and like kind of carry people through the process. Because, I mean, the reality of these things, especially, I mean, it's just kind of infinite. So this ended up being one of the marks, and that was the final mark. So like that one became kind of like a backup. I'm not sure exactly, but that's like the actual mark, which is like the one I like the most. It's like the weirdest one. So then like just for a project, for myself, I think I pulled this out because like if I'm just doing a project for myself, I do it in the exact same way. So at one point I told myself, like I was like I graduated from CalArts grad school, and I was doing kind of terrible work and like having bad jobs, and then I started, I had my first art show, which was a show of silkscreen posters in like 1998 or 99. And then I made the decision at that point that, and it came very easy, and I did kind of new work, and then I kind of I realized like that I just have to do that as for everybody else all the time. I just need to be doing that, and so I did, and so I just started doing art projects for everybody else, and it was very easy. And then I think it's like now I've been doing it for so long that's now it's kind of like now I do like it's, so when I'm doing a project for myself, I go through like the full design process, even though it's just a project for myself. Like I'm almost doing presentations for myself, you know. But I mean, they're like that owl thing. They're very loose, and they're distilling my thinking. But I'm distilling my thinking for myself. And I think it's, you know, and I have to be critical. So this is showing myself the scale of my sculpture, you know, but which, like, you know, is helpful. But it's like, I realize like that's like the design process is my process, and not necessarily the design process, but like almost it's like a client, like a client designer kind of relationship. So these are wooden tacks for this. So it's a show for Lance Armstrong's Live Strong Foundation, and so it's just, you know, doing something. The theme on the Live Strong, like his cancer awareness thing. So these turned wooden tacks, painted this super matte yellow. So this is, did this, it was recent a while ago. Now it's like a couple months old. There's a video for OK Go. And it's kind of a different song for them, I guess. It's like kind of a love song, and it's about a guy, and he's singing to a leaf. So I did all these kind of, it's based on, I'll show you in the video in a second, but these are just sketches for it that are like, kind of like, so it's kind of the irrational, to me, like what I got from the song, it's like, it's very human, and it's like where the, like it's very human to fall in love with a leaf, but then be sad when when in the fall when it falls off the tree. Like that feels like the essence of what it is to be like a human being. So this is like a bird that in love with a muffler. These are just some images from it. So the fox and the baby carriage. So that they came to me with the idea of, they had the idea already, which was that they wanted it to be on toast. Which isn't like exactly an idea. I don't know what that is. That's the hook, is that it's on toast. So I just ignored that it was on toast, and I just thought like, okay, I'll just like listen to the song, and I will just do, and I knew, and so the way it was going to be on toast was it was going to be burned into the toast with a laser. And so I'd done stuff with lasers before, so I knew it had to be line art. So, and I do tons of stuff with line art. So I just basically did an animation, and then they had a group of like a director and like technical people at MIT who did all the burning. So my job was like the easy part, and I just kind of ignored that it was on toast. But then it was like, it's the hook, so that's like what made like people watch it, that it was on toast, which is very clever. OK Go are very clever at that definition.
Go ahead again.
So it's not fake.
If you should be the last autumn leaf hanging from the tree, I'll still be here waiting on the breeze to bring you down to me. And if it takes forever it'll be. And if it takes forever it'll be. Seed in the spring to venture out and leave, I'll still be here waiting on the rain to warm your heart for me. And if it takes forever it'll be. And if it takes forever it'll be.
Yeah, so like watching that, it's like, it is again, like I think the reason like you ignore that it's on toast, because you know like that, like what the game I'm in is to try to create like empathy in people, or to create something that you're like connecting into, like with the toast, like that you get like lost in the toast and you forget that it's toast, you know? Which is hard. I don't know. I mean, I watch it, I don't know. I guess it depends on what, if you're looking and you're just looking at it as toast, or but for me, like it was about like trying to create empathy for, you know, that like going inside like the mind of a fox in love with a baby in a baby carriage or whatever, to kind of create this like depth in these like cartoonish moments. So this is a project that that never happened, but it was for the Obama administration to create. They needed a logo, they needed a mark so that when they would give there was a thing called a recovery community. So if an area, so there's that little logo that's I don't know what it says, but it's got like a little, like a gear, and it's like to show that there's like government funds going to a project. And then they wanted to create another sign that would show like a whole community that is getting kind of government support to like build up the economy. But then it turned into some very strange, it got political. But also like this image is, I thought it was so funny because it's like this, it's so socialist, my image, which is what I wanted it to be. But this is an example of like, I do all these projects, but this is the one I'm interested in showing because like this is, you know, it's like the stuff that like never happens is way more interesting than the stuff that happens. So a lot of the work I do, or like that, kind of everything I do actually is generated from doing shows. They're often installations. And it's really like, for me, it's like this, it's the laboratory for making new work. And so I did this like, it's like maybe a 600-foot print that was like 12 feet tall, and it had and it repeated like every 30 feet, no more, every 40 feet it repeated, but it was all these screens that we silk screened. So it was the exact size of the ground floor of my studio. And it was this long, it was along this long curve and then went into this big ball. So that was in the Netherlands. This was a show I had at Red Cat in downtown LA with Ed Fella. So Ed Fella was on the other side of the room. So you go through, there's this like tunnel, and you go through this tunnel, and these are paintings I do with tape. So I do a tape drawing basically, and then fill inside the tape. And you go into this room that becomes so it's like a painted room full of graphics and things. So this is where that us and them pose. So this was a show I had after Red Cat that just came down. It was up for a couple of years. It was an installation at the Seattle Art Museum in their sculpture pavilion. So it's something that was supposed to be, as much as it was kind of basically just filling this wall, which is basically the size of a billboard, and then it was also sculptural. So there's this like horn kind of coming out of the wall that you can blow through that would make noise. And then all these posters that are molded, they are molded plywood actually. So they were pressed plywood the same way you would make a skateboard or like an Eames chair. But they made these bended things. And then this is another room. You go into this room and you see this square casting the shadow of a circle. And the central image, the theme for this was this thumbtack casting the shadow, like it's like a pin casting the shadow of a tack. And to me, I wanted that to be like a sad image, like a pin that like just wasn't true to itself. Fake tape. So it's kind of this layered, in the show, for me, like doing art shows is a way of, obviously it's a way of just you're developing your own, you gotta just physically fill a room. But for me, and you can obviously do whatever you want, but really it's like about it's like very publicly owning up to what is going on inside your mind. And things becoming real, like it's one thing, and it's like a rhythm. As many ideas as you have, at some point it's gotta like come out and become become real. And in the shows, I think it was like a revelation for me that like you can draw, like I could do a drawing of this, but then the actual thing, being a thing, is kind of a revelation for me, that realizing you could actually have, like, instead of like drawing a picture of an apple in a show, you can actually have an apple sitting there. And I usually don't. I usually have just a drawing of an apple, but it was like a very simplistic realization. So here's a real project. So this was the titles for, like, this was in the trailer, I think, for Where the Wild Things Are. This was a series of fabrics I did that they, so I did all the licensing stuff, so the stuff that like you put together a whole package and then they sell it to different vendors and the vendors make stuff out of it. So these are this like a repeating fabric. So these are things for the New York Times that actually didn't happen. They chose a very, very kind of a super simple version of it. And these were the titles for the actually in the film. And these were funny because they, like I kept doing them, and Spike was always frustrated, and because they looked too good. So finally he came over to my studio on his scooter. That's why I said scooter, because he came over on a scooter, and forced me to draw with my left hand, and we had like a left hand drawing contest, because I wouldn't do it. Like I would say like, yeah, I can do it worse, but it still wouldn't be. And then, so we would draw and we would keep doing them, and he'd do one, then I'd do them, but his were all really rude. They were really like disgusting. Which is kind of like source of like graffitiing over these people that paid for his movie. But you can imagine what he drew over Village Roadshow pictures, that I was like, maybe it could be a sword. But it was really funny. So like, I don't even know, like I'm pretty sure that second one, I can't tell because he really got it to the point where it didn't look like I drew it, which is like funny. So I don't even know if I drew the second one, because I have no connection to it. So this is a show, kind of the most recent work I've been doing. So these are paintings did for a show called The Westist, which, so The Westist, I was imagining like, so the themes in the show are kind of images from my life in some ways, like iPhotos that I'm taking, but really it's about the West. And the West being this place, like how far west can you go? So I was saying to one of the students today that my show in the Netherlands was called The Difference Between Yeah and Yes. So yeah and yes, it's the same thing, but what is the territory between those two words as language? And calling the show The Westist, so like this invented word, like how far west is west? Like it's like, is it like knee deep in the ocean, or is it like over your head, or is it the high tide line? Like how far west is west? And these are kind of images that are, to me, so it's kind of taking things that are familiar and turning them into just icons, or like reducing to the point where they start to just like break apart and just be shapes, but they're all kind of familiar. So so this is showing kind of the process. So it starts off as these drawings. So I'll do a drawing, and then I'll do a rough painting then I'll scan the drawing and I'll do I'll trace it in Adobe Illustrator as this super geometric thing and play with color. And then take that and then do gouache studies of that same drawing. I'll redraw it and then do a gouache painting of it, and then do the final painting based on the gouache painting. So this is what the gouache paintings look like. So it's like kind of imposing, like again, like kind of imposing this process, this kind of structure on on myself, like I'm presenting to myself again. So this was, and like out of that came, like this was the first gouache painting I did. And then I realized that the back, like this was an image, I'd taken a photo of a friend of mine who's actually a cowboy. And I realized that it, like someone's head down, it's like the back of his head actually almost becomes a perfect circle. So then the final painting, the back of his head becomes a perfect circle, and it becomes like the whole, like a hole in his head, or like depending on how you see it, it could be like a hole in his head, or he's missing his face, or what it is which is the back of his head looking down. These are all the vans I own. And this, I just got back from Italy, where I was part of a show called Graphic Design Worlds, which was a show at the Triennale Design Museum there. They have a big museum that's devoted all to design. And it's a show organized by an Italian studio and a curator. And it's just got designers from all over the world in it. And my installation was called When I'm Thinking, I'm Shrinking. So this was kind of taking the most recent work I did for the Westis show and applying it to like what it looks like as a large installation. And it's all, again, kind of on this idea of disappearing and things disappearing, and this kind of space between form and language, and when you're at the deepest point of creativity, that point when you are, reality kind of, it starts to melt away and you just kind of evaporate, and you kind of lose your sense of self. And I do a lot of what I do is kind of based on that kind of, the idea of like creativity, or making images about creativity, and really the images are kind of about the transcendental experience of creativity, where when you're going deeper and deeper into the creative process, you actually get farther and farther away from yourself or the world around you. And so in creating these images, I mean, ideally, it's that, again, that this, that her head, like that's her head, like this circle, that it starts to separate from, it starts to float. And when so this is really huge, it's like 32 feet. So when you're close to it, it starts to break apart. And so that it's like kind of a physical, that trying to create a visual representation of what it's like to kind of dissolve into creative thought, or some sort of transcendent. So in the middle, there's these 3 paintings on the walls, and then there's this like central tower that's 16 feet tall, and all these things are painted on the wall. And then her legs, you can open up her legs, and you can go inside the tower. And then there's older work that is from the show in Seattle that came down, and there's some of that work and some new work inside the tower. So, because the idea was that it's like you show historical work to kind of represent who you are. So this is kind of like my room in a show with like 20 or 30 other designers. So on the tower are all these different girls that are in different stages of kind of disappearing, or kind of having these like hallucinatory moments. And so the girl on the left, it's her, like she's pulling a dress up over her head, but maybe she's gone. And I'd done this painting I'd done small size for the show at the Westis. But this one, because it's Italy, she's got black underpants on, because it's for Italy. So this is a little bench you can sit on, and then inside that book is actually a video screen, which is playing this video. So that's my studio. So you open up the book, like the idea, this is a loop, so it just loops. And this, and then you pick up the book and then you just kind of hear this sound. And originally it was done for the show in Seattle, but it was in 4 different books, so each one of these animations, each book just held one animation. And so that you would go to the next book and it would hold a different, and it would just be this repetitive. It would just, each book held a different loop that would repeat. So this was more interesting for me because this is just, like I wanted to see these things happening in my studio. But if you've never been to my studio, it's less interesting. What's strange is that, like, this is like years ago and I still have the same stuff sitting on my desk, I think. Something's wrong. Oh, it's missing a piece. It's okay. Wasn't the best part. And that's it. I'm done.
Yes, please.
Here's some bonus slides, actually. Any questions?
Did you go to a Montessori school? And how is that kind of informing your process? Either way.
No, I went to a very basic public school, but my daughter goes to Montessori school. But the Montessori was actually like, so it's like a guy blowing up a girl's head. It's actually kind of a joke, because I actually really like Montessori, but it's kind of showing like specialized education. It's like a demented take on it. But I do think Montessori is good. I'm of the belief that like Montessori and Waldorf are perfect for adults, but maybe like all adults should live Montessori and Waldorf, one or the other, even more than kids. But I think that's why people put their kids in those schools, because they actually want that, which is basically what I do for myself.
I can just talk really loudly. We're streaming it, so I noticed you said that you read the reviews and they said cartoony. Do you? I mean, it sounds like you took value in that. Do you tend to read your reviews?
No, I don't. Well, it wasn't a review. It was like somebody like doing an article about the show. Like, I don't think anybody reviews design shows, unfortunately. I don't know if there are any design shows though, actually. So she had emailed me for a quote to like she'd interviewed me to talk about the work. But then the way she had written about it was like saying it was cartoony, in his signature cartoony style. So it's actually worse than saying it's like my signature cartoony style. Which there's like, it's like, so this just happened yesterday. So I'm still working through it publicly, how it feels to be called cartoony. And I don't know exactly, like, maybe I should just be into that. I don't know where I stand on it. But I do think it's interesting because I definitely have like a response to it. And I think that says something. Like, I brought it up because I think that says something about me and the way I want to be perceived a certain way and not another way. But at the same time, I do cartoon frogs, which is why I added that, because I wanted to mention, like, I don't like to be called cartoony, but I want to do cartoons. And I think that's very much who I am, that it's like I want to show my work in galleries, but I don't want to show my work in galleries. I only want to show my work in public spaces, but I want to show in galleries, and I want to sell work, but I don't want to sell it ever. Like, it's like that's very much, and I want to do cartoons, but I don't want you to call them cartoons, So I don't know so there's something to that about me.
Hi. I was wondering how your undergrad studies and then your grad studies really influenced your process, in particular, since you seem to have chosen to just be very much about kind of yourself, like, this is what I like to do and I like to draw as part of the process, and then evolve that. So is that more of like, that's always how you've been in your personal life, or is that something that you picked up and then evolved throughout your life and your career?
I think it's definitely evolved, and it's like continuously evolved. There was a time when I didn't ever show drawings. The drawings weren't part of my work at all. Like, you would never, everything was like, looked very mechanized and machine made at one point, and then for a while I was just showing drawn stuff. But I think, what my undergraduate was at the Alberta College of Art. So I grew up in a town in Canada, Calgary, Alberta, which is like a medium-sized town for Canada, like 1 million people, 600,000 people or something. It's like the local art college, and so this is in 1980, 90, early 90s, 92, 93. And at that time, it was still, like, I was learning, like, Paul Rand era graphics. Like, it was cutting out letters out of type, doing stuff with ruling pens, which is like a tradition that comes out of like Swiss schools that taught typography, that was then interpreted in America as like, so this kind of like modernist tradition of like handwork. And then all these archaic processes, like weird film things where we'd make film and then it would make color, like all this stuff that now is actually lost to time. And then in my third year, we got computers, and I bought a computer, and started making everything on the computer. Well, not everything, but like doing stuff on the computer that looks just like stuff now. It's Adobe Illustrator and whatever. But I still had that, like I straddled that time, and I still have that root, and then I went to Cal Arts, and that's where I learned how to make what I make now, which is basically using this very like critical process, like a critical way of like looking at work and concocting work out of ideas and making it clear. Although in Cal Arts it was like concocting ideas and making it super unclear. I just like was like, okay, no, like let's concoct ideas but then make it super clear, because you know, which was like, that was my like slight twist on the working in a Cal Arts way. So in that way, like everything I do like comes out of my education in a way that's like I think is kind of funny. But you know, I always drew, and the drawing, you know, I think it's like, for me, it's drawing is just a way of like, I don't want, like, for me that's the way I think, like that's just a way of like working through ideas, and then it happens to like actually appear in my work, you know. So it's like, I think writing, for someone else, like writing does the exact same thing, you know. It's just a way of, it's like of like both making things and getting rid of things, you know, like you're just getting it out. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
I was wondering, whenever you were in school, did you ever have like one particular assignment that really like stood out or changed the way your practice was really like informed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two projects I can think of like in graduate school, it was just super crazy, and I was just making really, really horrible work, like just weird. Well, when I went to graduate school, I actually told myself I would not draw. So that was another thing. Like, so I was doing all this work. I was working as a graphic designer already. Like in undergrad, I was doing skateboards and snowboards. I had a whole I had a whole working life, and I was designing interiors and doing all this work. And so I kind of knew like I could do that. And so like when I went to grad school, the idea was to stop doing all that. So I told myself I would not draw. So for 2 years I didn't draw at all. But I remember I did two projects my last year of undergrad, and one was a project about Jan Tschichold, the typographer. And that was like, so like, that was like seeing, the first time I ever saw, like doing research on him, like, oh, this is design. Like it was like my 4th year of undergraduate, and I figured out, okay, this is design. So I did a project on him and made it, and it looked nice. And it was like the first time I ever did something, and it was very organized and Swiss. And it was the first time I ever made something that I was like, oh, I designed something. And then I also did a rendering of in gouache, a rendering of a tube of Rolos. Do you know that candy, Rolos? So it's like, and I was like, wow, and I just totally did it, and it looked like super real, like it could have been in a Rolo catalog. So that totally, and so that kind of summed up. That's like basically where I'm at now. So, but both things looked really good, totally believable professional work.
I'm wondering if who that work, like who are the people who are working now that inspire you, or that like you would consider your peers, or I mean, is there like a group of artists that you work with that you check in with, or that you consider, like you appreciate their perspective on what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I mean, I have a lot of like people, like creative people around me that I guess I respect their work, you know? I mean, think, I mean, that's tough. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to just like name drop a bunch of people. It's weird. I can say like the type of person like that.
I mean, it could be people from the past even who aren't necessarily, I mean, are there like people that you look to for inspiration that are still around and working?
Yeah, that are still around and working?
Yeah. Or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, I don't think I could do what I do if like Milton Glaser didn't exist, you know? Or Mike Mills, who was doing, like, I think Mike Mills was the first designer I saw who was just like totally not working as a designer. And I think that was really, and then working with Spike Jones. And like Spike, like I've worked with him for over 10 years, and he's just like a really unique, like determined, super conceptual guy that I think that he definitely, like he said a few things like early on in our collaborations that, like, I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but that definitely like shaped the way I kind of operated professionally, which I think is, you know, I think that, like, I didn't really talk about it that much, but so much about like being like of what I do is just the way I do it, the way I perpetuate what I do is like, so as much as you can have influences creatively, you're also like the choices you make, like who you work for, what type of work you do, how your relationships with people, like seeing how people treat clients or treat the people around them, that stuff is super important to like keeping on doing what you're doing, you know? And so like that was, you know, like, so I'd look at like the way Spike worked, like collaborated with people, or the way Mike Mills viewed being a graphic designer. And, but I think like there's so much stuff that's about, I guess it's, you know, that people, you know, that's about like how you run your studio. And for me, it's like always about like, how do you like protect your creativity? How do you like nurture your own creativity and like protect it from like negativity, or, I mean, this sounds like self-help stuff, but like, I mean, it is like really like, you know, like if staying up all night makes you depressed, like working, then you just have to work out a way that you don't work like that, you know? Like as simple as that. But I don't know. So yeah, I guess, I mean, there's a lot of people I guess have influenced me, but I think it's, you know, I think it's the same thing, like I want to do cartoons but not be called a cartoonist. It's like, I want to take it, like I look at a very broad spectrum of influence, you know, and I want to like invent I've always just assumed I'm going to invent what I'm doing and like who I am, that it's going to be to some degree like an amalgamation of different things. So I'm super influenced. Like it's almost like I'm so influenced. Like that's why it's hard to answer the question, because I'm like influenced by everybody. You know, like it's every single person influences me, that because I'm really trying to create like a master amalgamation that like fits perfectly, you know, to what I want.
You know, it was interesting in your journey and sort of like this visual reduction of, you know, your graphic language. How important does scale or size of your final product or what you envision play into what you're doing in that reduction or in that sort of like simplifying process?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, there's like that one, and then there's that one. So that one's like 36 inches, and that one's like 15 feet or something. I mean, I guess it's like, I think it's like from doing, I think it's like, it's been a long process of like doing my first shows, and they've always been installations to some degree. So it's been a process of like really learning how to show, like how to, you know, when you do a show, there's you get like a diagram. Like very often I can't go to the place where the show's gonna be. Like I never have shows in LA. And so I can't go to the place. Like I'll get a diagram of the space and you have to like imagine it and like project what you're gonna do in it. I mean, it's like any creative project. Like if you're doing an identity for a company, it's kind of the same thing. You have to like project yourself forward, way forward in time to like living with what you're doing. And if it's really big or really small, it's just like, how is it gonna be to be in the space with this thing you've made? So I think it's like scale and kind of what works, like I have like a goal in mind, like it's like kind of back, like I'm my client. So like I have like, it's not like a vision and it's not or it's like a goal of how, I always know how I want something to feel. So that's like, so there might be like the ideas involved, like the kind of like conceptual ideas are like, it's kind of like there's like a web of ideas, but I know where I want it all to kind of finally land. And so like scale and kind of imagery and color and how you move through the space and all that stuff is kind of, that gets dialed into this like landing zone. I don't know, that's all really abstract. But yeah, it's been a long process of like first shows, like everything like feels like scattered, and then it feels less scattered, I think, as time goes on, I think. Okay, thanks.